In Matthew 22, we see this event unfold where the Sadducees and the Pharisees are trying to trap Jesus. And one of the experts in the law comes before Jesus and he asks him what he believes will be a very hard and tricky question to answer. And it goes like this. It says, "But the Pharisees had heard Jesus had silenced the Sadducees with his reply. They met together to question him again. One of them, an expert in religious law, tried to trap him with this question. 'Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses?' Now Jesus says this. He says, 'You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Yet a second is equally as important.'" Now stop right there. A couple things I want you to hear. First thing, a lot of times when we hear this, we read this scripture, it says that the teacher and the expert in the law asked Jesus this question, what is the greatest commandment in the law of Moses? And when we hear this a lot of time, and Jesus quotes two of the big 10, right? The 10 commandments. And a lot of times when we hear this, we're thinking, well, Jesus is telling what the greatest commandment is. The teacher of the law, the expert in the law said, what is the greatest commandment in the law of Moses? The law of Moses is not just 10 commandments. The law of Moses in those days would have been known as the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And in those 5 books, you have roughly 350 plus laws. You have 350 plus, it's something like 361, 67, somewhere in there, laws that were to be followed by the Hebrew Jewish people. They were to be followed to the letter, to never ever go left or right of the law. And so we sometimes think that Jesus is just being asked what's the best of the 10 commandments. No, it's much more broad than that. The teacher of the religious law is asking Jesus, what's the greatest commandment in all of the law of Moses? The first 5 books, the Torah. And Jesus breaks it down to these 2 things. He says to love the Lord your God with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And then he says something that was very controversial at the time. He says, and then the second is just as equally as important. You see, that could have been translated as blasphemy, to put something as equally as important as loving God. But Jesus knew some things that we didn't know at that point, or the people that heard him did not know at that point. Jesus knew what his mission was. Just like we talked about yesterday in the first day, Jesus knew his mission was to do the will of the Father and to save humanity of their sin, to put others above himself, to serve and not to be served. That was the 2 things that were 2 most important things to Jesus, was to put God above everything else, to do the will and the mission of the Father, but to put others above himself. And that's why he goes on and says, this is the first and greatest commandment. But a second is equally as important, and it's to love your neighbor as yourself. And I love here that it's not saying don't love yourself. I hope when you hear this week, when you practice this week, when you do all the challenges and read the scriptures this week, what you're not hearing is that you're not supposed to love yourself. You are dramatically supposed to love yourself. You are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of the Creator God. That makes you valuable in and of itself. So you should love yourself. But you should also love your neighbor as yourself. You should put your neighbor before you. And then Jesus goes on in verse 40, the entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these 2 commands. He's saying that if we will love God with everything we are and love other people, our neighbor as ourselves, We don't have to worry about the rest of the commandments. We don't have to worry about thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet another man's wife. You shouldn't covet, you shouldn't. All of those things, you'll keep the Sabbath holy. You'll honor your mother and father. Even those 10 commandments, all the other law of the prophets as well. You will keep those in line if you'll do the 2 big ones. That's to love the Lord your God and to love people. And if we're to practice this thing called self-denial, we have to put God first. God has to be over everything. Has to be the priority in our life. And then others has to be the priority in our life. It can't go me and I do whatever I want and then God and then others. It can't go me and then others and then God. It has to go God. The center of everything that I breathe, everything that I say, everything that I do is God. And then others are before myself as well. We're serving God and we're serving people. Let's do it this week. I believe in you. I love you. There's nothing you can do about it. And we out.